It was one of those hot, dry Oklahoma afternoons when the sun feels like it's sitting just a little too close to the earth. I was out on the porch with a glass of iced tea, the kind my wife, Lauren, makes with a slice of lemon and way too much sugar. I could hear the faint hum of her voice from inside the house, singing along to some old Patsy Cline tune while she cleaned up after lunch. It was the kind of lazy Saturday that made you forget there was anything wrong in the world. We'd been married for 17 years. 17 long, winding years filled with the usual ups and downs. Lauren and I met back in college at the University of Oklahoma. I was studying mechanical engineering, and she was doing psychology, though she never finished her degree. She was the kind of girl who lit up a room without even trying, all red hair and quick laughter, with this mischievous streak that kept you on your toes. I loved that about her, or at least I used to. Lately, things between us had felt off. Not bad, exactly, just different. We weren't arguing much, but we weren't talking much either, not the way we used to. It was more like we were coasting, going through the motions of marriage without really connecting. She'd been distant, more tired than usual, more irritable, and quicker to snap at me or the kids. At first, I thought maybe it was just stress. Lauren had taken on more hours at the pediatric clinic where she worked as a receptionist, and with 2 teenagers, our 16-year-old son, Ben, and 13-year-old daughter, Emily, there was never a dull moment at home. But there were other things too. Little things I couldn't quite put my finger on. The way she'd avoid eye contact sometimes, or how she'd pull her phone closer when I walked into the room. I told myself I was just imagining it. Still, something didn't sit right. I didn't think much of it at the time when Emily had that cough that wouldn't go away. It had started as a cold, but a week later, she was still hacking up a storm. Lauren insisted we take her to the doctor, even though I thought she'd get over it on her own. Better safe than sorry, she'd said, giving me that look she always gave me when she thought I was being too laid back. So we made an appointment with Dr. Bradley, our family physician. The visit itself was routine. Dr. Bradley listened to Emily's lungs, took her temperature, and said it was probably just a lingering virus. But then he mentioned something about our family's medical history, asking if there were any hereditary conditions he should know about. Lauren rattled off the usual: no history of diabetes, no heart disease, no cancer. But when he asked about genetic disorders, she hesitated. I don't think so, she said, glancing at me. Right, Dave? Not that I know of, I replied, though honestly I wasn't sure. My dad had passed away young, car accident, and my mom wasn't exactly forthcoming about family history. I realized I didn't have much to offer in the way of answers. Dr. Bradley must have noticed our uncertainty because he suggested genetic testing. It's just a precaution, he said. If anything unusual pops up, we can get ahead of it. Lauren was quick to agree, but something in her voice sounded forced, almost nervous. I chalked it up to her being overprotective. She'd always been that way with the kids, the kind of mom who packed hand sanitizer in their lunchboxes and made them wear sunscreen even on cloudy days. The test itself was simple enough, a quick cheek swab for all of us. Emily thought it was kind of cool, like something out of a spy movie. Ben, on the other hand, groaned about how pointless it was and couldn't get out of the clinic fast enough. It's just a waste of time, he muttered as we walked to the car. I'm fine. Emily's fine. Everybody's fine. You'll thank me later, Lauren said, sliding into the driver's seat. She glanced at me in the rearview mirror as she started the engine, her eyes flickering with something I couldn't quite place. Worry? Guilt? I couldn't tell. For the next few weeks, life went back to normal, or what passed for normal in our house. Lauren was busier than ever at work, and the kids kept me on my toes. Ben had started driving, which was a whole new level of stress I wasn't prepared for, and Emily was begging us to let her dye her hair purple for an upcoming school dance. I spent my days working at the manufacturing plant on the edge of town, where I'd been a maintenance supervisor for the past decade. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills and gave me enough time to coach Ben's basketball team on the weekends. Then the results came in. Lauren had picked them up from the clinic after work one evening. I remember the way she walked into the kitchen, holding the envelope like it was radioactive. "The test results are back," she said, her voice tight. I looked up from the sink, where I was washing dishes. "And?" She hesitated, glancing at the kids, who were bickering over the remote in the living room. "Maybe we should talk about this later," she said, lowering her voice. That struck me as odd. If everything was fine, why couldn't she just say so? "You're acting weird," I said, drying my hands on a dish towel. "What's going on?" "Nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. "It's just complicated. Can we wait until after dinner?" "Sure," I said, though my stomach tightened at the way she avoided my eyes. For the rest of the evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Lauren was unusually quiet, picking at her food and barely responding to the kids' chatter. When Emily asked if she could have ice cream for dessert, Lauren just nodded absently, her mind clearly elsewhere. After the kids went to bed, I cornered her in the kitchen. "Okay, spill it. What's in the envelope?" She sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's probably nothing, but one of Emily's results came back flagged." "Flagged?" I repeated, my chest tightening. "For what?" "Some kind of anomaly," she said, her voice shaky. "Dr. Bradley said it's probably a mistake, but he wants to run some additional tests to be sure." I studied her face, searching for answers she wasn't giving me. "What kind of anomaly?" She hesitated, looking anywhere but at me. "Genetic." There was something in her tone, something evasive, that set off alarm bells in my head. But I didn't push her. Not yet. That night, as Lauren lay in bed pretending to sleep, I sat on the edge of the porch with a cold beer, staring out at the endless Oklahoma plains. The cicadas were loud, their steady hum filling the silence, but my mind was louder. Something wasn't adding up. I just didn't know what. The next morning, I couldn't shake the conversation from the night before. Lauren had been restless all night, tossing and turning, and by the time I got out of bed, she was already up, standing at the kitchen counter with a cup of coffee, staring out the window like she was waiting for something, or someone. "Morning," I said, trying to sound casual as I grabbed a mug and poured myself some coffee. She didn't respond right away, just gave me a tight little smile before going back to her staring. "You okay?" "Yeah," she said quickly, too quickly. "Why wouldn't I be?" I shrugged, leaning against the counter. "You tell me. You've been acting weird since those test results came back." "I told you it's nothing," she said, but her voice had that edge to it again, the one she got when she was trying to shut down a conversation. "Lauren," I said, lowering my voice. "If there's something going on, I need to know. Don't keep me in the dark here." She turned to me then, her eyes flashing. "There's nothing going on, Dave. Why do you always have to assume the worst?" "I'm not assuming anything," I shot back, keeping my voice steady. "I'm just trying to understand why you're acting so jumpy. Is it about Emily? Because if there's something wrong with her—" "There's nothing wrong with her!" she snapped, slamming her mug down on the counter. Her reaction startled me, and for a moment, we just stared at each other in tense silence. Finally, she sighed and ran a hand through her hair. "I'm sorry," she muttered. "I didn't mean to yell. I'm just stressed." "Stressed about what?" I asked, trying to keep my tone gentle. She hesitated, chewing on her bottom lip. "Work. The kids. The tests, everything." I wanted to believe her, but something in her eyes told me there was more to it than that. Before I could press her, Emily came bounding into the kitchen, her hair a tangled mess and her pajamas wrinkled. "Can I have pancakes?" she asked, plopping down at the table. "Sure, sweetie," Lauren said, her tone suddenly soft and motherly. She busied herself at the stove, and just like that, the moment was gone. Later that day, while Lauren was at work and the kids were at school, I found myself pacing the house, unable to focus on anything. That envelope with the test results was still sitting on the kitchen counter, unopened. I knew Lauren wouldn't want me to look at it, but the curiosity was killing me. "Don't do it, Dave," I muttered to myself, running a hand through my hair. But of course I did. I opened the envelope and scanned the paperwork. Most of it was medical jargon I didn't understand, but there was one part that stood out, a note about discrepancies in paternal markers. I stared at the words, my mind racing. What the hell did that mean? Before I could dwell on it too long, my phone buzzed. It was Lauren. Hey, I said, trying to sound normal as I answered. Hey, she said, her voice tight. I'm running late at work. Can you pick up the kids from school? Yeah, no problem, I said, glancing at the clock. Everything okay? Fine, she said, but her tone told a different story. After I hung up, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. The drive to the school was short, and by the time I got there, the kids were already waiting out front. Emily climbed into the back seat, chattering away about some project she was working on for art class, while Ben grunted his usual, hey, and plugged his earbuds in. Mom's working late, I said as I pulled out of the parking lot. Again? Ben muttered, not bothering to look up from his phone. She's been working a lot lately, Emily said, her voice thoughtful. Do you think she's okay? She's fine, I said, more to convince myself than her. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, I decided to confront Lauren. She was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels but not really watching anything. We need to talk, I said, sitting down beside her. She didn't look at me. About what? You know what, I said, my voice firm. She sighed and set the remote down. Dave, I told you, it's nothing. You're making a big deal out of nothing. I read the results, I said bluntly. Her head snapped toward me, her eyes wide. You what? I read them, I repeated, holding her gaze. What does discrepancies in paternal markers mean, Lauren? For a moment, she just stared at me, her face pale. Then she stood up and started pacing. It's probably a mistake, she said, her voice shaky. Those tests aren't always accurate. Don't do that, I said, standing up too. Don't brush this off like it's nothing. I want the truth, Lauren. She stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite identify, fear, guilt, maybe both. I don't know what it means, she said softly. Bullshit, I snapped. You know exactly what it means. So just tell me. She shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. I can't, she whispered. Why not? I demanded. Because I don't know for sure, she shouted, her voice cracking. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt the room spinning around me as I tried to process what she was saying. What do you mean you don't know for sure? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked away, her shoulders shaking. I mean, I don't know if you're Emily's biological father, she said, her voice trembling. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and suffocating. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at her. When? I finally managed to choke out. When did this happen? It was a long time ago, she said, her voice barely audible. Before Emily was born. I thought it didn't matter because she's yours, Dave. In every way that counts, she's yours. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. My mind was racing, replaying every moment of our marriage, every decision, every memory. How could this be happening? I sat back down, not because I wanted to, but because my legs didn't feel strong enough to hold me up anymore. Lauren stayed where she was, standing in the middle of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was bracing for impact. The silence between us stretched on until it felt unbearable. Who? I finally asked, my voice hoarse. Who was it, Lauren? She flinched like I'd hit her. It doesn't matter. Don't you dare tell me it doesn't matter! I exploded, standing up so fast the coffee table rattled. You don't get to drop a bomb like this and act like I shouldn't care about the details. Who was it? Her eyes darted away from mine, and for a moment I thought she wasn't going to answer. But then she sighed, her shoulders slumping like the weight of the truth was finally too much for her to carry. His name was Kevin, she said quietly. The name hit me like a slap. Kevin. I knew a Kevin. Everybody in our small town of Moore, Oklahoma, probably knew a Kevin. But there was only one Kevin who mattered in this context. Kevin, as in, your old coworker Kevin? I asked, my voice sharp. She nodded, not meeting my eyes. It was a mistake, she said quickly. A stupid, one-time mistake. I swear, Dave, it meant nothing. I let out a bitter laugh, running a hand through my hair. A mistake? A mistake doesn't have the potential to blow up our entire family, Lauren. Jesus Christ, I can't believe this. She took a step toward me, her hands outstretched like she thought she could calm me down. It was so long ago, Dave. It was before Emily was born. I thought it was over, I thought. I thought she was yours. You thought? I said, the word tasting like poison in my mouth. You thought? How the hell do you just gamble with something like that, Lauren? How do you let me go 13 years thinking she's my daughter when you knew there was a chance she wasn't? Her face crumpled, and the tears she'd been holding back finally spilled over. I didn't know what to do, she sobbed. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought it would ruin everything. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You were right about that. She let out a strangled sound, halfway between a sob and a gasp, and covered her face with her hands. I turned away from her, unable to look at her anymore. My chest felt like it was caving in, and I couldn't catch my breath. Emily. Sweet, stubborn Emily, with her dark hair and quick temper. She didn't look like me. People had pointed that out before, but I'd never thought anything of it. I just assumed she took after Lauren. And now, I didn't know what to think. I need some air, I muttered, grabbing my jacket and heading for the door. Dave, wait, Lauren called after me, her voice desperate. Please don't go. We need to talk about this. But I couldn't. Not then. If I stayed in that house for another second, I was going to lose it. I slammed the door behind me and got in my truck, not even sure where I was going. I just needed to drive. I ended up at the park on the edge of town, the one with the creek that Emily used to play in when she was little. It was dark now, the moon reflecting off the water, and the air was cooler than it had been earlier. I parked the truck and sat there for a long time, staring out at the empty playground and trying to make sense of everything. My mind kept going back to Emily. She was my daughter. She had to be. I didn't care what some stupid test said, she was mine. I'd been there when she took her first steps, when she lost her first tooth, when she scraped her knees falling off her bike. I was the one who'd taught her how to throw a softball, who'd stayed up all night helping her with that science project about volcanoes. I was her dad, in every way that mattered. But was that enough? The question haunted me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. Could I keep pretending like nothing had changed? Could I live with the knowledge that she might not be my biological child? And what about Lauren? How the hell was I supposed to look at her after this? My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me out of my thoughts. It was Lauren. I stared at the screen for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the decline button. But then I sighed and answered. What? I said, my tone sharper than I intended. Where are you? She asked, her voice still thick with tears. At the park, I said shortly. Please come home, she said. We need to figure this out. There's nothing to figure out, I snapped. You lied to me, Lauren. For 13 years, you let me believe Emily was mine when you knew there was a chance she wasn't. How am I supposed to get past that? I didn't know how to tell you, she said, her voice breaking. I was scared, Dave. Scared of losing you, of breaking our family apart. I thought if I buried it deep enough, it would just go away. Well, it didn't, I said bitterly. And now we're here. There was a long pause on her end, and I could hear her sniffling. What about Emily? She finally asked. What are we going to tell her? The question hit me like a gut punch. Emily. God, she didn't deserve this. None of this was her fault. She had no idea her entire world might be about to change. I pictured her sitting at the kitchen table, laughing at one of Ben's dumb jokes, completely unaware of the storm brewing just beneath the surface. I don't know, I admitted, my voice softening. I don't know what we're supposed to tell her. Maybe we don't have to tell her, Lauren said hesitantly. Maybe we just leave things the way they are. Are you kidding me? I said, anger flaring up again. You think we can just sweep this under the rug and pretend like nothing happened? What's the alternative? She shot back. You want to tell her that everything she knows about her family is a lie? That the man she's called dad her whole life might not actually be her father? How do you think she's going to feel about that, Dave? How do you think Ben's going to feel? I didn't have an answer for that. She had a point. Telling Emily the truth would shatter her, and I wasn't sure I could live with myself if I did that to her. But lying? Keeping this secret for the rest of our lives? That didn't sit right with me either. I need time, I said finally. I can't make this decision right now. Okay, Lauren said quietly. Take all the time you need. Just please come home. I didn't respond. I ended the call and sat there in the dark, staring out at the empty swings swaying in the breeze. I had no idea what I was going to do, but one thing was certain, nothing would ever be the same again. I sat there in the truck for what must have been another hour, the engine off, the silence pressing in on me like a weight. The truth was, I didn't want to go home. I didn't want to walk back into that house, sit across from Lauren, and pretend we could somehow fix this. But the thought of Emily and Ben upstairs in their beds, oblivious to the storm that had blown in, finally pushed me into gear. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was dark except for the kitchen light. Lauren was sitting at the table, her head in her hands, a half-empty cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up when I came in, her face pale and drawn. You're back, she said softly, like she hadn't been sure I would come. Yeah, I muttered, shrugging off my jacket and tossing it over the back of a chair. I'm back. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the air between us thick with everything left unsaid. Finally, I sat down across from her, rubbing my hands over my face. I still don't understand, I said, my voice low but steady. How could you keep this from me, Lauren? How could you look me in the eye every day and not tell me the truth? She reached for her coffee but didn't drink it, just wrapped her hands around the mug like it was the only thing grounding her. Because I was afraid, she said, her voice trembling. Afraid of what it would do to us. To you. To Emily. I thought if I told you, you'd leave me. And then where would that leave her? Or Ben? I let out a bitter laugh. So instead of risking the truth, you decided to live a lie. That's great, Lauren. Real solid decision-making there. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I felt a pang of guilt. But then I thought about those words again, discrepancies in paternal markers, and my anger came roaring back. Do you even know for sure? I asked. Is he Emily's biological father? She shook her head, her hair falling into her face. No, she whispered. I don't know. I never asked him. I never told him about Emily. Unbelievable, I muttered, leaning back in my chair. So you just decided to roll the dice and hope for the best? It wasn't like that, she said, her voice rising defensively. I didn't decide anything, Dave. I made a mistake, one mistake, before Emily was even born, and I spent the rest of my life trying to make up for it. I love you. I love our family. That's all I ever wanted. Well, congratulations, I said coldly. You got what you wanted. Except now, the whole thing's built on a lie. She flinched like I'd slapped her, and I almost regretted the words. Almost. The next morning, I woke up on the couch. I couldn't bring myself to sleep in the same bed as Lauren, not after everything she told me. She tried to talk to me again before I turned in for the night, but I'd just shaken my head and told her I couldn't deal with it right then. When I walked into the kitchen, Ben was sitting at the table, scarfing down a bowl of cereal. Emily was at the counter, making toast. Morning, Dad, she said cheerfully, flashing me a smile. It hit me like a punch to the gut. I forced a smile back and muttered, "Morning." Lauren wasn't in the kitchen. I assumed she was upstairs, probably hiding out until I left for work. Part of me was relieved. I didn't know how much more of this tension I could take. "You okay, Dad?" Emily asked, tilting her head as she spread jam on her toast. "You look, I don't know, tired." "I'm fine, kiddo," I said, ruffling her hair as I passed. "Just didn't sleep well." She wrinkled her nose but didn't press me, and for that, I was grateful. I kissed the top of her head, something I'd done 1,000 times before but that felt different now, and grabbed my keys. "See you guys after school," I said, heading for the door. "Later," Ben mumbled through a mouthful of cereal. Work that day was a blur. I couldn't focus on anything. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lauren's tear-streaked face, heard her voice breaking as she told me the truth. And every time, my chest tightened with a mix of anger, hurt, and confusion. Around lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and stepped outside, leaning against the side of the building as I scrolled through my contacts. I hadn't spoken to Kevin in years, not since he'd quit the clinic where he and Lauren had worked together and moved to Tulsa. But his number was still in my phone. My thumb hovered over the call button. What the hell was I even planning to say? "Hey Kevin, remember that one-night stand you had with my wife 13 years ago? Yeah, we might need to talk about that." But I didn't press it. I shoved my phone back in my pocket and stared out at the parking lot, my jaw clenched. I wasn't ready. Not yet. That evening, after the kids had gone to bed, Lauren cornered me in the living room. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. I probably didn't look much better. "We need to talk," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "About what?" I asked, not looking up from the TV. "About what we're going to do," she said, sitting down on the couch beside me. "We can't just keep pretending like everything's fine." I sighed and turned off the TV, rubbing my temples. "What do you want me to say, Lauren? You dropped a bomb on me. I don't even know where to start." "I want to do a paternity test," she said, her voice steady. I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "I want to know for sure," she said. "If Emily is, if she's yours. I need to know, and I think you do too." Her words hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to agree, wanted to rip the Band-Aid off and finally get the truth. But another part of me was terrified of what that truth might be. "And what if she's not?" I asked quietly. "Then what?" Lauren's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "Then we deal with it," she said. "Together. As a family." I laughed bitterly. "A family? Lauren, you tore this family apart the second you decided to lie to me." "I know," she whispered, her voice cracking. "And I'm so sorry, Dave. But Emily loves you. Ben loves you. I love you. I'm begging you, don't let one mistake destroy everything we've built." I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the fear in her eyes. She was terrified of losing me, of losing the life we built together. And despite everything, despite the betrayal and the anger and the hurt, a small part of me still loved her too. "Fine," I said finally. "We'll do the test. But I'm not making any promises about what happens after that." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. The test was simple, a quick swab for me and Emily. She thought it was for more medical reasons, and we didn't tell her otherwise. Waiting for the results was hell. Every day felt like an eternity, and every time I looked at Emily, my chest tightened with guilt and dread. When the results finally came, I opened the envelope alone. Lauren hovered nearby, wringing her hands, but I couldn't let her see the truth before I did. The words on the page blurred together, but one thing stood out: probability of paternity, 99.9%. I sank into a chair, the paper slipping from my hands. She was mine. Emily was mine. Lauren stepped forward hesitantly. "Dave?" she asked softly. "What does it say?" "She's mine," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Emily's mine." The relief on her face was instant, but I didn't share it. The betrayal still lingered, the lie still fresh. But in that moment I knew one thing for sure: I couldn't let this tear my family apart. For a long time, neither of us said anything. I sat there staring at the results, the words seared into my brain, while Lauren stood frozen a few feet away, her hand covering her mouth like she was holding in a sob. Finally, she took a cautious step closer. "She's yours," she repeated softly, almost like she couldn't believe it herself. "Yeah," I said, the word coming out rough. "She's mine." Lauren let out a shaky breath and sank into the chair across from me. Her hands trembled as she reached for the paper, but she stopped short, like she was afraid to touch it. "This is good, right?" she asked, her voice hesitant. "I mean, this is what we hoped for." I looked up at her, and for the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt something other than anger. I didn't know what it was: relief, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Yeah," I said finally. "It's good." She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for days, her shoulders sagging with relief. "Thank God," she whispered, pressing her hands to her face. But for me, the weight didn't lift. Sure, the test said Emily was mine, but that didn't erase the betrayal, the lies, or the fact that Lauren had let me live with this doubt in the first place. "What now?" I asked, my voice flat. Lauren lowered her hands and looked at me, her eyes rimmed red but steady. "I want to fix this," she said. "I want to fix us." I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. "You don't just fix something like this, Lauren. You lied to me, for years. You let me think we were solid, that our marriage was built on trust, and the whole time you were hiding this." I gestured toward the test results on the table. "I know," she said, her voice breaking. "I know I screwed up. But Dave, please, you have to believe me. I love you. I've always loved you. This wasn't about not trusting you. It was about me being scared. Scared of losing everything." I looked at her, at the desperation in her eyes, and for a moment, I felt my anger soften. But it wasn't enough. "You were scared?" I repeated, my tone sharp. "How do you think I felt, Lauren? How do you think it felt to find out my wife wasn't who I thought she was? To wonder if my own daughter wasn't mine? You didn't just break my trust, you broke me." She flinched, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I know," she whispered. "I know I did. And I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. I'll go to counseling. I'll tell you everything, anything you want to know. Just don't give up on us, Dave. Please." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that we could somehow move past this, that the 17 years we'd spent building a life together weren't all for nothing. But the hurt was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. "I need time," I said finally, my voice heavy. "I don't know if I can do this, Lauren. I don't know if I can forgive you." She nodded, wiping her tears. "Take all the time you need," she said. "I'll wait. I'll wait as long as it takes." The next few weeks were strange. We didn't talk about the test, or Kevin, or the night she told me the truth. We didn't talk much at all, really. I slept on the couch most nights, and Lauren gave me space, though I could tell it was killing her. She kept trying, though, cooking my favorite meals, asking about my day, offering to help with things around the house. It was almost like she was trying to remind me of the woman I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. And maybe that was the problem. Every time I looked at her, I didn't just see the woman I'd married. I saw the lies, the betrayal, the cracks in the foundation of our marriage. The kids, thankfully, didn't seem to notice the tension. If Emily or Ben suspected something was wrong, they didn't say anything. And I wasn't about to burden them with the truth, not yet. One evening, about a month after the test results came back, I found myself sitting on the porch again, a cold beer in my hand and the Oklahoma sunset stretching out before me. It was one of those evenings where the air felt heavy, like a storm was brewing, and the sky was streaked with oranges and purples. Lauren stepped out onto the porch, hesitating in the doorway. "Can I join you?" she asked softly. I nodded, and she sat down in the chair beside me. For a while, we didn't say anything, just watched the sun dip lower on the horizon. I miss this, she said finally, breaking the silence. I glanced at her. Miss what? This, she said, gesturing toward the view. Us. Sitting out here, just being together. I miss how easy it used to be. I took a sip of my beer, not sure how to respond. I've been thinking, she continued, her voice tentative. About everything. About what I did, and how much I hurt you. She paused, glancing at me. I know I can't undo what happened. But I want to make things better. I want to make us better. I sighed, setting my beer down on the table. Lauren, I don't know if we can ever go back to the way things were. This, what you did, it's always going to be there. I'm always going to wonder if there's something else you're not telling me. She nodded, her eyes glistening. I get that. I do. But I'm not that person anymore, Dave. I've spent the last 13 years trying to be the best wife, the best mom, I could be. I know I failed you in the past, but I need you to see who I am now. I need you to see that I'm worth fighting for. Her words hung in the air between us, heavy and raw. And for the first time in weeks, I let myself really think about what life would be like without her. Without our Saturday mornings in the kitchen, the sound of her humming Patsy Cline while she made coffee. Without her sitting next to me at Ben's basketball games, cheering louder than anyone else. Without the woman who had, despite everything, been my partner through 17 years of marriage. You said you'd go to counseling, I said finally. Did you mean that? She nodded quickly. Yes. Absolutely. I'll do whatever it takes, Dave. Anything. I took a deep breath, staring out at the horizon. Okay, I said. We'll try. But it's going to take time, Lauren. A lot of time. And I can't promise I'll ever be able to forgive you completely. Her face crumpled with relief, and she reached out, grabbing my hand. Thank you, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Thank you for giving us a chance. I didn't say anything, but I didn't pull my hand away either. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I knew that. There were still days when the anger and betrayal threatened to swallow me whole, when I wondered if I'd made the right decision by staying. But there were also moments, small, fleeting moments, when I saw a glimpse of what we used to be. And those moments, as rare as they were, gave me hope. We started going to counseling together, and for the first time, I heard Lauren talk openly about her fears, her regrets, and the guilt she'd carried for so many years. I talked too, about the hurt, the betrayal, and the part of me that still loved her despite everything. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. And in the end, that was enough.